Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here, and I am back with this video I was not planning on making, but there was a patch this week, and the arena balance was looking so great for a minute, but there were changes made or constructed essentially, and it changed the balance a bit for arena, so I'm going to talk about that right now. This is the patch notes here, and I'll post like right here. This was the result of the last tier list video I made. I thought the changes were significant enough because there's going to be a new Overlord to Arena, a class in the S tier, but also a couple classes moving around in a significant enough way where, you know, when classes move around here, like B tier is kind of what you want to pick and C is usually what you don't want to pick. So since there's movement here, I thought it was significant enough to talk about it. So with that, let's get into these changes. First, couple of Paladin cards were nerfed. Paladin has been really crazy and constructed, so first one that is nerfed is Keeper Strength. Pretty significant change. It still does exactly what it did, except it's moved to 5 mana. This card is not actually draftable in Arena, but this still makes a big difference because if you do play Paladin, a huge way you win is to actually... I didn't know that was still on. Thanks for subscribing, somebody. But like to actually discover this card, so it can obviously still matters, but also the much bigger change is Prismatic Beam. I actually got 1 mana more expensive, so that's significant. It will never be free, even if your opponent's board is full, but also it no longer deals face. I've actually had that be very, very critical. Your opponent just having 3 less health is generally really nice, but I've even had that make a big difference against Warrior, knocking off armor, for example. So this is a very significant nerf to Prismatic Beam as well. And next up, there were a couple nerfs to Druid, specifically Dragon Druid. The first one is Splish Bash Whelp losing an attack, which is annoying, but overall, I mean, you don't pick this card for a stats, you pick it for the ramp. But also Desert Nest Matron losing a health. Also, not the biggest change in the world, is 0 mana 3/4 instead of a 0 mana 3/5. But it does something, right? So Druid being nerfed ever so slightly. One major change now, another nerf to Shaman, is the legendary. If you happen to have Dr. Holiday, that was really the best high roll you could have in Shaman, other than just, you know, getting like a bunch of walking mountains and stuff. The big high roll was really just getting Dr. Holiday. This is a very significant nerf to it because instead of a 2/9 weapon, it's a 1/9 weapon. And that, I've even seen that in game already be a very big difference. Just on board, like this two attack will often kill things, and 1 attack just very often does not kill anything, so it makes a very big difference. You end up just having to swing this face most of the time, and it deals half the damage as it would have. So it's more about the frogs now and less about the fact that the weapon also is a more significant deal there. So a pretty significant nerf to Shaman if you happen to get the legendary, which you do like 15% of the time or something. It's not, you know, legendaries are not that rare anymore because you get 1 per draft. Next up as well, I believe this is the last nerf, is to Arcane Worm. Arcane Worm just losing a health. Honestly, not that important, but you know, sometimes that matters as well. And there's a Power Technician ban that doesn't really affect Arena. So next up, we're going to be talking about the buffs. The buffs, first of all, Elise Badlands Savior in Priest, the Highlander payoff legendary, is going from a bunch of 4/4s, it summons a bunch of 4/4s, to summoning a bunch of 5/5s. Honestly, if you get an Elise to go off, you're probably winning anyway. There's a fair chance that an AoE that would kill a bunch of 4/4s would still kill a bunch of 5/5s. So I don't know if this even makes that much of a difference. I mean, it was already really strong if you could get it to go off, but I guess it's even stronger, right? So can't hurt. So that's a buff to Priest as well. Pip the Potent going from a 4 mana 3/5 to a 3 mana 3/3. This could help, I guess, sometimes, but honestly, it's not even clear this is a buff in Arena. Like, this is more of a constructed change. Whenever they do this, it's kind of funny because, like, is this even better? I don't know. In Arena, it might not be because 3/3s are pretty bad, honestly. Like, this might actually just be worse. So that one's not very significant. What is significant, though, is the buff to Invasive Shade Leaf, going from a 4 mana shadow spell that deals 8 damage and then saves excess in 1 cost spell to dealing 10 damage, saving excess in 1 cost bottle. That's pretty significant because, I mean, for example, if you kill like a 7/7 from Warlock, for example, the fact that you have a 1 mana deal 3 instead of 1 mana deal 1, obviously it could be very, very significant. It might not end up not mattering because you might overkill again, but you know, it's definitely a good buff to that card. And another Priest buff is to Rodin. instead of just being a death rattle that summons each minion you play this game. Now it has taunt as well, which probably a buff, you know. You don't see Rodden very often, but if you happen to have it, it is a thing. And then next up, there are a couple rogue changes. So the first one was to Scorpion. I actually had a rogue deck with a lot of excavates that was generating Scorpion. This one is definitely a major buff for Arena, at least. There's some debate about it in Constructed. I still think the rogue mains are a little upset they have to spend mana on anything, right? But this one is, instead of just getting 4 ram spells, and if you've excavated 8 times, they cost 0. In Arena, you realistically are never doing this, so this was not that great. But now it's get 4 random spells. They cost 1 less for each time you've excavated this game, but not less than 1. This is what's triggering the Constructed players, some of them. This is a huge buff for Arena because you're not getting to this anyway, and you know, this is at least a 4 mana discount to all the spells you generate, so that's like 16 mana worth of mana cheat at least, right? Not exactly, because you get cards that are cheaper than 4, so you don't get the full discount, or cheaper than 5, but you're still gonna get like usually at least like 5 or 6 mana cheat from this, so it's a huge change that makes this card a lot better for Arena. And next up, there's also a buff to Valorok Windblade. This card, apparently, I've been hearing is completely broken and Constructed now, because instead of playing 3 from other classes to reveal Valorok's true form, which is a charge that generates more mana cheated cards from other classes, now you only have to play a single card from another class. And I think for the same reason, it's really good and Constructed. It was pretty hard to do this because you had to play 3 cards from other classes while they're in your hand. That's hard to do, no matter how much you do, because you just don't necessarily have it in your hand when you early enough, and it has to sit in your hand for a long time. Kind of difficult, but now just having to do 1, that's a big difference, because that's a lot easier to do. Because Rogue has enough ways to generate that you can do that pretty consistently, so that's a huge buff if you happen to have this legendary. And another buff to another card, Shell Game, just going from 3 mana, generate 3 random cards, and epic rare and common from other classes, now just to 2 mana. At 3, this was a pretty expensive way to generate cards, but at 2, that makes a big difference, just makes it a lot easier. Suddenly it's really efficient, so you're still not guaranteed to get that many great cards out of it, is the thing, but you know, it's enough value that it definitely has a place, and you have synergy with the Burgle cards. And then I believe the last set of changes, we'll see, there might be more, but Barrelless Sludge, this is an interesting change because it is going from 2 mana deal 3 to 3 mana deal 4. They are classifying this as a buff, and for Warlock I think it is a buff. I definitely think you can argue for like the neutral Sludge Generator cards, this is probably a nerf, but specifically in Warlock, because of all the ways you have to discard or destroy them from your deck or hand, I do think this is a significant buff for Warlock, which we'll talk about in a second. Another reason we'll talk about in a second, but also Furnace Fuel going from 4 mana to 3 mana. I drafted this the other day because just having this be an Arcane Intellect instead of a 4 mana draw 2 makes it a lot more playable, and you know, you have the upside that you might be able to discard or destroy it as well. And then the last card being buffed as well is Popguard the Putrid. To match the Sludge change, they've actually made it so this card is your Fell spells cost 2 less. Which makes it so instead of just being 1 mana deal 3, the Sludges become 1 mana deal 4. But also, I mean, this is less of an Arena thing, a more Constructed thing. I don't think they thought this through, because this is very broken and Constructed actually. But you know, if you happen to get Popguard, I have seen a few. I didn't see these really before, but now I started seeing a lot more of these, and this is a really strong card in Arena as well. Death Knight changes as well. Monpaw, which was like the worst legendary in the game pretty much, or one of the worst class legendaries, it gains an attack, so I did see someone play it. It makes it a lot better. I still think it's bad, but you know, you could pick it maybe. Climactic Necrotic Explosion, not in Arena right now, but it did get a bit better. They just increased all the numbers on it by 1. And oh yeah, the really significant change for Arena here is the Corpse Bride. The Risen Groom gains Taunt, so that just makes it so, you know, you're more likely to get away with playing it, so that's a very significant change there. And let me see, there are a few other changes. Khaz'goroth, which isn't really you can generate it from Mage Titan, I guess. It gained a health, okay, whatever. Slagmaw the Slumbering did get pretty significantly buffed because it lost 2 turns worth of Dormant. I still think, I looked at the stats and it's actually like semi-pickable now, but it's still not great, honestly. You just don't know if you're going to get the excavate or not to make it even work. And then even if it does, it might get executed or something. So it makes it a little painful. And then the last change, which honestly isn't that significant for Arena, Horseshoe Slinger goes from a 3-mana 2/2 to a 2-mana 1/1. Technically, I guess this buffs Flint because it just makes it slightly more likely to be able to chain the Flint an extra time. So there's that, but otherwise, I'm not even sure if this is a buff either. You know, I guess if you draw it on turn 1, it's great, but otherwise, yeah, not so significant there. And doesn't affect balance. So that was a lot of changes actually. So let's talk about how that actually affects the tier list here. There are going to be 3 classes, I believe, actually 4 classes, I think, that I'm going to be moving on this tier list here. The first one, as I talked about with the sludges, is the new Overlord of Arena, and that is Warlock. So Warlock, I actually think might have been kind of in this position already, to be honest, even before this change. But I think it was slept on a little bit, partially because it was really bad. But also I was looking at stats and it's very clear that people were underpicking the Sludge Synergy as is. Like, I think people think that the 4-mana 7/7, for example, has a drawback. That card is just one of the best cards in Arena. People were not picking it nearly as much. You can actually see that from the stats. People are starting to pick it more. And that's been a big part of what's made Warlock very good. For any card like that, and you have the same thing with like Felry, for example. The card does not have a drawback. It is just a 4-mana 7/7. It actually has upside because of the Sludge Synergy, right? It's very rare. I don't want to say it never happens, but if you're playing it on curve, you're not going to fatigue, because if your opponent's going to leave that thing up that you actually start fatiguing, they're going to be dead because they've been hit by the 7/7 too many times. So it's just an insanely good card independently, and the fact that it also has, you know, Sludge Synergies allows it to also cast Twisting Nether on the opponent's board sometimes, or deal like Power Blast to their face. Like, it's completely nuts. The next class we're changing here is Shaman. So Shaman's actually going to be going down. That changed to the Highlander Legendary because, as I mentioned, it is, I think, in like close to 15% of decks. That is a significant change, and gonna hurt it too much, but enough that I'm actually going to lower it down to C tier. And also being lowered down to C tier, I'm going to have Paladin, because mainly the Keeper Strength change, as I mentioned, did matter a little bit, but even more than that, the nerf to Prismatic Beam was absolutely huge. And the last change, the last movement we're going to have, I'm going to talk about Priest as well, but the last movement is that I do think this is enough that Rogue has moved up. I played a Rogue run, it seems pretty good. I think Rogue may have even been underrated before, but yeah, all of those buffs to Rogue, some of the Legendary, the Excavate, the mana generation, or the card generation, just all of that is pretty significant. So I think Rogue moves up as well. I think you could make an argument for even letting Priest finally have a slot with some of the other not so great classes. I'm still going to keep Priest in the F tier, but I will say Priest is no longer a distant worst class. I still think it's the worst class, but honestly, I would probably pick it over a lot of these classes. It's just my one recommendation is you still don't really want to play like Control Priest. I think if you play Tempo Priest, the class is actually pretty decent, and then you probably could argue that it could move up into the C tier. You still just don't have enough value that you're still going to generally lose to other classes if you try to go, you know, more of a typical playstyle. I honestly think that's the reason it probably has such a bad win rate still. I think it actually is decent now, but I'm still going to keep it in F tier because it's kind of a meme at this point. But that is it for the new version of the tier list. Since we have a new top class mainly, and also especially the change to Rogue, I wanted to classify on this tier list as well, and the nerf to Paladin. These were the 3 biggest changes right here due to this patch, so I wanted to get that update out there to keep you guys up to date. But with that, appreciate everyone hanging out again for this video. I'm going to make another video soon, and talking about Warlock, I am also going to have a 12-win Warlock up very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Of course, subscribe if you want to be notified for that. Click the bell, to stuff, like, comment, let me know what you think, all of that stuff, you know, YouTube mumbo jumbo. But yeah, appreciate everyone hanging out. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.